Do you ever eat something and before you're even done ingesting something, you realize, what am I doing? And this is terrible, and I'm tired, or I feel stuck now, and things like that. That's what happens with donuts for me, and I try not to do it. I get my son donuts all the time, and I get like a ham and cheese croissant. And today I had a maple bacon bar, I had a all pink sprinkle, and I had a rainbow sprinkle, just like that. It feels different. So happy Monday. There it is. If you want more information on the Bronco and the intro to it, watch the first episode. What we want to really do is press, just like we do with Vivian, we want to press into each update with our current stuff that we're doing, or what's been done, you know, from the last update to what we're doing, and then what we're going to do next, and just keep it like that. So if you want to kind of watch the history, just go back on the first episode and watch from there. We're only on number 2, so it's not bad. So this is where we last left off. All 2-inch cage. We did like an extendo cage on this thing. We kept the solo portion of it from A pillar to B pillar, right to this area, and then we extended everything back where we needed to. We obviously notched the frame. Everything is just on here for you guys. The shock mounts are done. I had them tacked back on just so we could get a proof of concept of what all the packaging looks like, at least for the running gear. The sway bar is still not on. We can go into that, but this is fully route past. The X here, this plain X is just tacked in for easy working on this thing. Ingress egress of getting, you know, constructing, welding. This just pops back off. And we'll put this X in last just so it's not infringing on any of our real estate when we're working. Things to touch on from before. The cage was very important to be designed in a way where it was going to work without the hardtop on, or with, and also to not bird cage that third seat occupant. Sometimes you can see like people build just to the constraints of the third seat in SUVs, and it you know, it's safe probably, but it just doesn't feel, sometimes when you're enclosed like that, it's like a claustrophobic kind of thing, and it feels sketchier when there's not room around you. So we wanted to try to get design wins on all this, and that's the same with like this thing. It tapers just slightly from this profile towards the rear. This tapers down. Everything kind of kicks out. The whole rear packaging is going to be built for the fuel cell area, so you can expect, well, we'll talk about that, but just assume the rear is going to be full of fuel here. The shock mounts were kind of the next thing. I think last episode we talked about doing the fuel cell next, but it just didn't make sense to like have all the suspension floating still and not have that solidified. So we have all the shock mounts complete. They're in here just as a proof of concept, but they're all prepped and ready for their second pass. I'm gonna go in there and show you guys what that looks like. So to touch back on what I'm talking about here with profiling, I think we already had these outside tubes done. We just didn't have any of the lacing done. So I think we had our big runner tube here, which is our belt line tube that holsters the shock mounts. And then we also had that top perimeter tube, and that was it. Everything else got green taped, and we pretty much landed everything exactly where we needed to. The whole perimeter constraints for the structure there were determined by that seat. So we laid the seat in there, figured out, we had it rigged and just kind of mocked up in there where it made sense. We had the axle fully compressed, so it was kind of landing in the notch here, and also the upper links were fully compressed, so we could kind of dictate where that seat was going to be, and it wasn't going to infringe on the sway bar right there or the upper links coming up. If you kind of follow around, there's a pretty solid cavity here. Whoa. Of just real estate in here. So we're definitely going to get, you know, and the shock mounts are already done, so you can see like the span from driver to passenger is pretty vast. You could probably even fit 2 seats there, but really we just want to focus on that 1 seat, having enough foot room, and then, you know, your driver and your passenger, and, you know, then we'll be able to put like storage bags, refrigerator, everything we need to. Another thing as well is going to be the AGM jack. So there's going to be AGM Dakar jacks, which are pretty tall units. They're probably going to span, you know, they're going to go through the floor there, and then they'll come up pretty high, almost to the top tube here, and we'll have a mount there. So I think we'll get a win with some kind of like diagonal tie-in from the B pillar here down, and we'll have that be, you know, like something integrated to hold the jacks. And the AGM jacks, there's only 2 on the car, and they span, I think they're 30 inches or 36, and they, you know, they're hydraulic, so once you release the valve, the whole car will lift up on one side, and that should get the front and the rear tire off the ground on you know, each side. This is Alex's build so far. I think I'll step in when the time comes. You know, for a lot of these, we're finding success in having you know, multiple people on one build when the time makes sense. You know, like as far as right now, like what's going on, it's just kind of meat and potatoes. Just getting all the chassis work done, the groundwork for the suspension. You know, the shock mounts are in, the sway bar will want to go next, the bump stops will want to go next, and then you know, we'll get into that fuel cell. But obviously, like some of the bigger ticket items that might require more extensive design and like just, I guess, experience would be the dash and like the header work and a lot of the sheet metal work. So I will kind of navigate some of that with Alex when the time comes, and we really get some gains in with putting a couple guys on the one, you know, one project at a time for a certain amount, and it's super helpful. So something else I want to kind of look at with you guys is the shock mounts, and not so much the shock mounts themselves, but the prep that we have on there. I want to give you guys just some helpful tips on if you're constructing stuff like that and TIG welding and doing double passes. So let's look at that. So this is a, you know, all plate construction shock mount. You can see what's going on here, and it's just refitted in the truck right now. Like you can see, this one's not really fitted all the way. It's got to go down. There's a little bit of a chingus there. But at least on this structure here, you can see like there's, I don't know if you can kind of tell, there's a heat mark here that's been blended out, like the DA sanded off, but that's a weld washer on the inside. We like to build a lot of the shock mounts with weld washers on the inside, which is like a weld washer is essentially the thickness, like it's the plate thickness plus another thickness, where it gives the bolt hole more grip around you know, where the hardware is, and so it obviously adds more strength, and it doesn't let the hole get elongated or turn into an oval. So a life hack for us, at least at the shop, with most everything that we double pass, I will have the guys prep it for me. I usually do the final pass on stuff, just because their skill level is not quite at that point where I can sign off on final welding. But we have kind of a technique here where we bevel stuff. So all of this area that you see here, that seam, that's all a welded seam. Obviously all these are welded seams. That's a welded seam, right? Same thing under here. And all that stuff gets like a really nice, hot, consistent root pass, no pulse. So that means just like the pedal, just not floored, but just at a consistent rate of amperage. And that's all filled, and then it's sanded down almost to a 45. and then everything is re-DA sanded or orbital sanded, and it just adds a perfect foundation for you to like crown the final pass, and it's perfectly clean. Because a lot of times if you don't sand that down like that, some of the weld, that initial root pass in there will have like contamination where it'll almost look like a lily pad will like kind of rise to the surface of your puddle. And sometimes if you don't stop and sand that out or center punch that out, then that lily pad will just kind of drag with you and start contaminating the rest of the weld. So this is really how we do preps on like nicer, bigger box parts. Some of the smaller stuff doesn't need it for obvious reasons, but when we really want to press on this thing being optimal and having the best chance for good welds it can, we'll prep everything like that. Design wise, on something like the shock mounts, it's really important to me. Like when I built Beth is my white Super Crew, and I did the whole back half all plate, no bends, all miters, and I did it all miters then because I didn't have a bender. But I made it look a way where it like you didn't think that. It was just like it looked like cool, like a cool style. But I added so much plate. Like this is a plate work, but I had plate work on levels of just, I call it artistic diarrhea. And you know, it's a lesson. And sometimes when you're not able to work creatively on something for a long time, then when you get that option to do it, you just go overboard. And I did that with Beth quite a bit. It's not at a point where I would redo it, but it's just something I wouldn't do again. And lessons I always take with design is how much plate work do you need in something, like where it makes sense. You know, what are you going for? What's your overall original intention with stuff? So like breaking this up and kind of putting, you know, exposing some of the tube and making this piece look like it's kind of grabbing onto the structure. That was important. And you know, making this extra cut also adds gusseting and structure instead of just having flat plate through here. So you can get a lot of wins like that. This cap under here is a broke cap, so it actually is a flat plate here, and then it goes all the way up to the top, and then it does the same thing on here, and it goes all the way to the top, and it follows kind of where the shock cap is. So we wanted to get that win. One of the elephants in the room on this truck is 3 B-pillars. There you go. Get that gargoyle finger out of there. There is 1 B-pillar by the door. There's 2 B-pillar here, and then there's a third one that's the existing, like from the very original cage, which is just a kind of a rogue tube out there. And you know, some of this stuff, it's more haphazard to just keep, like you have to draw the line on some of this. When you're rehabbing a car, and this is not like a full complete build, you have to find that line of like, where can you stop? Because if you just keep cutting stuff, it's going to turn into the whole thing being gutted and gone, and you're starting fresh, and you're losing the purpose of what you were going to do in the first place. And I think the win is really accomplishing the challenge and, you know, rising to the occasion for figuring out where that blend is, where you can tie in and make everything work. And that B-pillar section was kind of my stopping point, because 1 tube, 2 tube, let's call that 3.5 tubes, and then there's sheet metal work in here. It's stepped, bead rolled, like it's nice work. It's totally salvageable, and it's strong as shit. That is absolutely stronger than most B-pillars in a car. So I think the safety thing is there. I know that sheet metal is going to start covering the rest of this, and you know, we'll sheet metal in here, but structurally, at least with the shock mounts, I wanted to grab that tube, because this tube that's closest to the coilover, that tube does go right into the frame here. And it kind of helps out right where that upper link is mounted to the frame. So I figure we leave that in the family, and then this shock mount can not only go to B-pillar number 2, but it can go to B-pillar number 3 as well, and it's all tied in. So you can see like the gusseting not only draws from here, but it draws over to there. So like that shock mount adds a tie-in factor here. It also disperses all of the load of the coilover, which is really going through a heavier load than the bypass. And then it's also just diving onto this diagonal tube here instead of just going straight into our runner tube. So that's adding a gusset too. Like it's really, that's the key with like shock mounts especially, is trying to find tie-in points where they're lending a hand to everything else. Like if you think about a chassis structure and you think about suspension and like all of your hard points, everything should be trying to help everything else. It should work in congruency where it's like an orchestrated strength challenge. You know, everything should support one another where you can, and that's why you get into that topic of dead tubes. There is no dead tubes here to show you, but usually like a dead tube is where you just kind of, you stab, like say this diagonal tube here, you stab that right into the middle and it doesn't have anywhere else to go. It just kind of sets there. And it has a load of force here that's pushing on something that isn't actually supported to wherever it lands. I hope that makes sense, but we'll get into that. I know you guys wanted to have some kind of a tube layout fab diaries, and that just has to like make sense when we're doing it, because we are a working shop. Like a lot of the fab diaries is a big investment for me because it takes a lot of time, and when we're running at full speed during the week, it's like I gotta pick and choose where we can get wins like that. While I am in here, I want to look at the root pass situation here. Everything, for the most part, except the X like we talked about, is all root pass, and you can see that's just a very tight, like everything is stacked, and it's a very tight, hot, consistent pass. Each tube is, you know, like you got to figure out which tubes are the primary. So obviously this X running from the C pillar down, that gets welded first. Then these tubes go in, they get welded. So no matter what, under every tube, it's not just the weld that you see, but it's also the welds that weld each primary tube in first. So that's why I say they're stacked. On that note, Alex, this is Alex's first build. Alex has been with me, I don't know how many months, but he's my second to newest hire. Alvaro is my absolute newest hire, but they're both on board, and the gains that they're getting are tremendous. It is the most satisfying thing, but I want to really talk about Alex with the welding for a second. You know, Alex came to me and he applied, and he sent me some pictures just of stuff he had done, and it doesn't need to be stuff where it's this. It's just where I want to get enough reference with someone where I can see I can feel if they have that potential to excel. And I asked Alex, I said, it all looks good, but can you TIG weld? Can you tag or anything? He's like, no, absolutely not. And that's where I'm like, oh dude, I can't do anything until you can at least tack, because if you can't tack stuff, then that means we're having to send someone over to like just put pieces together, and it won't work. Within a week, Alex had borrowed a machine from his old job, like mentor that was teaching him like MIG and stick, and borrowed a machine, brought it to his house, was using his washer and dryer plug in the garage, the 220 plug. Literally every day of the week was sending me progress pictures of him learning how to TIG weld. Like pushing, hungry, motivated. And that is one of the most impressive things to see in a person. With that being said, you know, looking at this stuff, this is Alex's first cage. This is his first vehicle that I'm going to give him. Obviously, we talked about like we're all step in to do stuff, but this is really his kind of baby, if you will. And if you start to look at the fitment, that's all just single pass, root pass, super tight, consistent. That's everywhere you look. You know, all the preps are just solid. He's got all of this down, like, you know, this is all stuff. I tell people, this is stuff that it's not a talent. You know, the design thing is one thing and making it look a certain way is one thing, but really the construction and fabrication, this is an acquired trade and a craft, and you can learn it. The talent really comes in how fast you pick the skills up and how quickly you can perform the skill. So it's beautiful to see this, and obviously every time we do carry updates, I'm going to try not to just go too hard on Alex, but I'm proud of him. I'm proud of you, Alex. And it's just beautiful to see. It's the same thing with Colin, with Vivian. I did a lot of the design coordination on that and the leadership in that, and then Colin really attacked it. Alvaro's taken the Chevelle on. All the guys are helping me with the Frontier. Colin and I are taking on the trophy truck. So working as a team, it is so incredible. And having guys that like we operate, I've been at several shops, and the level that we operate and how close we are and how we help each other and how we want everybody to excel, and it's a spot that we have something special here, and I want to try to retain that the best I can, being in the leadership role. So just props to that. It's just, the whole thing is gorgeous getting in here, and the thing is, the guys, they take their time, and it's okay to take the time to make it right, because I'd rather you take your time and get it perfect than take 3/4 of the time and still have something fucked up. And that's not how we do it. So like when I see things, everything checks out, everything is thought about. All the tubes, like they land tangent where we know panels are gonna be, so we don't have upsets, and you know, where the tube might be off a little bit where I have to break a panel or something. Everything is perfect. All the shocks are kicked into the perfect degrees. Like it's nice to see. Makes me stoked. Let's go back and talk about the fuel cell. All right, before we go to the back, we want to look at the stands. Whoa, whoa. This is the sway bar. Now, I'm not going to be able to put it where it goes because our shock mounts are in. We'll have to pull the shock mounts out or possibly just take these arms off to let them swing. But if you kind of look at the shape here, it's almost like it's not a square kick. So this is your sway bar, and then your splined area is here, and this arm kind of, it's already not 90. It already kind of kicks out this way a bit, and then it's got a big dramatic hitter, ping, off here. So that, if that translates to here, this is the rear of the truck, we're on the driver's side. So if that translates to here, we're coming out, and then we're breaking over like that to grab the link that's in the actual trailing arm. That'll float. It's a pretty tight uniball in there. So look at that thing in there. So that, you know, in line there, that's, you want to go from point A to point B. I think what we'll do is just, for obvious reasons, we don't want to run these. This is just like a fabricated tube thing. I think we'll put Quinn's 74 weld sway bar arm on here, which is just a straight shot. The straight shot will be great. It'll keep it in line with the frame here. It'll keep it away from the shocks when the shocks sway. Again, remember you guys, when you know, these trucks are not just built to go up and down with the suspension. They're always built to also sway and articulate. So you have to be very careful because the shocks will, you know, when that trailing arm on the rear end, like if this is the rear end housing and it articulates, it does swing. So the shocks will start to dive one way or another, and that's why you want to have like ample clearance. This is really good. I've worked on a lot of trucks before that might only be an inch from there or something, and it's not to say that they don't work, but it's definitely to say that there will be damage to parts, or there will be accelerated replacement on items because of them colliding with each other. So just something to think about. But that 74 weld arm will rip all the way through here. And then wherever that ends, I'm just gonna build a bracket that kind of bolts to the end, and it'll just kick out. And then we'll put a new piece of linkage in there, just a nice, like a, you know, a threaded rod, like a tie rod style, kind of just your typical idea here. I'm gonna get out now. The best thing you can do is grab straight edges and have a lot of them. Let's look at this really quick. This is my table I've been pushed off for welding from Sean. But see, every day I roll to a table, and this is what I roll with. And each one does different stuff. Some are for measurement. A lot of them are just to dictate where layout goes and how things work. So these are called my bays. This is an important thing to retain, and we can do this on fab dryers. These are my bays before anything else. These are the most important things. This is a 18 incher, I have 15 incher, I have a 24 incher. These are all bays. They're flimsy, they're perfect. I sand them off, so it's zeroed out. Like the longer one, I think the 24 sanded off. See this one? It's got like an 1/8. And I just burn that off square, so I never have to, like, I can just butt it up to something or whatever and start fresh. This is my taper bay. This is the most used item in here. It's a chromoly strip. I had to make a new one of these when I was over at Ryan's shop, and this is the most used thing. It does not move. I don't know why the taper makes it so much more useful, but it does. Black Mamba. This thing's from World War II. This is amazing too. I always use it for curves. I can get like really good compound curves out of it to do layout. You know, so if you're making a pattern that has a nice hit like that, you get that. And then this guy's just a peasant, like, you know, I don't care about this thing. This guy is your Silver Surfer ×4. Just better to have more. You know, sometimes you're building something and you want to know what's going on where, you know, and you want to just clamp those. So the more you have, the better. Straight edges. Let's go. Let's go look. How does that feel?
Oh, I felt it when, Jesus.
Oh. Don't do that. I'm not a tool. I'm not a tool. I'm not a tool. All right, we're here. Something else to think about, that geometry, right? Usually you see a Heim spread on the upper links where they're closer. Really the benefit to them being closer, like you can get good geometry off that Ceph. I was gonna say setup and shit and stuff. Ceph. I don't know, just accept me. All I want is love and acceptance. That's all I need in my life and I'm good. When they're further out, they wear and tear on the Heims and the rod ends a little more than they need to. So we checked all that when we swung it, like for pinion angle, pinion change, and made sure it's all good. So like whoever set that up originally, like geometry's solid. We're good on that. We have a special guest here that needs to tell us more about the upper links and the layout. Tell us about those upper links.
Saying they probably did it for the roll center because when they're spread out further, it means that the point that they would touch, where they would meet, would be further back.
Yep.
Which would change the roll center of the suspension.
I totally agree with you. Joey, you know what else I'm grateful for? I'm grateful for having badass dudes on every angle of our program where this is your YouTube guy dropping the knowledge. And that's totally true. Roll center. That's something to think about, and that probably would make that thing more stable then.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Because of the SUV, it's more weight back here than a normal truck, shorter wheelbase.
Exactly.
The whole deal. So it's...
Exactly. So that'll be cool to see. One more thing before we go to the fuel cell. You guys ever see that? So if you see what's going on here, that is a clipped piece. We call that an ear. Both sides there. I think there's more. No, we got everything else. We worked it all out. I was going to say there might be one up here, but no, we're good. That's all dialed. Yeah, everything's good. So the ear is something inevitably you have to do, especially when you're landing tubes. Like these tubes don't just land to flat and then another tube starts. Like everything shares an intersection. And what happens is when you start building in and you get a tight junction, you can't get this tube in. It's just locked in. And there's different situations that call for this, and what you do is you notch the tube and you clip this ear off, and then you fit the tube up in there, and then you put the ear back on and you weld it, and it's all good. The Everson trophy truck that we've done an episode on, we'll have another episode on, that it has a couple of those on there too, and it's just something that has to happen with cages. It's not right or wrong or good or bad, it's just to cut the piece off and then put it back in, bevel it, full pin weld it, and then some people will fluff and buff it, make it go away so you never see it. Other times, if you're just going to be a savage, you can just put a nice weld through here. Another thing to do too is instead of, cut that ear straight off, you can cut it at an angle, and you'll get a lot more weld surface where it's not just like a straight going from this upper tube to this rear tube. Like it's not a straight cut, it's angled, and it's less prone for cracking and things like that. Another thing before we talk about the fuel cell, this is something I have the guys do on areas that really matter. Chipboard, we use chipboard, it's 045, it's from papermart.com. I've turned a couple of other shops on to using that same stuff. Instead of going to Target and getting poster board or Michael's or something, you can get big old stacks of chipboard. I think people use Ram board too from Home Depot, but I believe that comes in a roll. And anything that comes in a roll, for obvious reasons, is going to suck because then you have to figure out a way to flatten it out. chipboard only gets you so far. When you're doing something extensive where there's multi-plane landings to get to, and there's multi-brakes, you really want to do your next step, and that's getting a chipboard template going, and then it's getting a 063 aluminum template going. And this template, like, what's nice is you can test out your brakes on the aluminum, and it's thin. So if you needed to adjust that and you put it on there, you go, oh, dude, it's like 3/16 off. Instead of this being your chromoly plate and you having to just whack the shit out of it, you know what I'm saying, and try to get that back, you don't have to. You can just hit the aluminum out, pop your brake back in where you think it needs to be, and then you can take all of your reference and your information collected off this, transfer that to the chromoly plate, and you just saved, you know, possibly not botching the plate, because sometimes you just can't get the brakes out of it, especially chromoly. So it's always a good thing. Other thing to use this on is like if you have something more extensive where there's multiple bolt layouts for something, a big component, maybe a steering rack or something has to go somewhere, or a transaxle has to like have a plate, you know, or a mid plate. Doing just some sort of a harder template like this with all your hole locations will dramatically help you and save you material and time in the long run. Shock mounts, those are in. We went over the sway bars. Things to kind of look forward to for next episode will be complete sway bars. So that means package all the way from the sway bar, 74 weld arms with fabricated kickouts, going to new tie rods or sway bar end rods, links, whatever you want to call them. Things with Heims. Have those dialed into the trailing arm, and then we'll have bump stop location, our classic like removable strike pad fabricated onto the axle. So all of the landing gear is completely dialed, and we don't have to focus on that anymore. We know everything functionally. It's just building things from the main function out, right? And that's where we're at. So we know that that third seat clears. We know that all the suspension does what it needs to do. We built the whole cage already knowing that the tires can articulate on the axle and bump on the axle and be fine and have no, like, so now we know where our perimeters are, where we're safe. Then we go, well, we need fuel. So where's that gonna go, right? The AGM jacks will be something, I don't think they'll be in next time, but that's something to count on, and they'll be big, robust guys that'll be behind the seats there, the front seats. But really the fuel cell is the next thing, and the fuel cell is also something we want to finish right now because it needs to go and get a bladder, and it just, the way the cookie crumbles is that stuff takes months. And we are absolutely going to have this for Nora next year, and it's going to be running, driving, tested, and raced, and we'll follow that whole thing too if Joey can get permission to go down there. Lindsay, I know, right? I'm asking for Lindsay's permission while I have to get the almighty Taylor. So packaging on this fuel cell. I'm excited about the fuel cell, okay? Leave me alone. It's fine. Like, everybody gets excited about different stuff. We want to maximize the capacity. There is not much that has to go back here. So the spares have this big, I don't know if we showed that on the first episode, but they have like a pretty dope plate bumper, and then like a really like nasty looking like military style swing out that holds two spares. The swing out system was built for 237s, but it'll fit 239s. We just need to kind of kick out the like the wheel mounting surface for them, and it'll work. But that being said, we don't have to have a spare tire inside the cab. We do need to have a nitrogen bottle somewhere, so that's something to think about. And then like obviously just your basic stuff. All of the cooling, I'm trying to get a win where we have all of the cooling up front. So oil cooler, trans coolers, intercooler, radiator, all that stuff lives up front. And it doesn't always need to be like vertical. It can be horizontal too, based on like priority and what kind of air needs to be fed into that thing. So with that being said, like this is kind of what you can count on dimensionally for the cell. Obviously this isn't living in here right now, so we can get in and out, but we need to build the cell so it can still slide out when this is a permanent fixture. It'll run this back wall, it'll come through, probably run the perimeter here, and it might either dip down, something like that, you know, and kind of, but it'll wing out, it'll branch out, so it'll go in and fill this whole void, you know, fill this whole void, and then the rear axle is going to have to be compressed again, and we'll have to have like some kind of a notch. But you know, we're talking 100 plus gallons for sure. Eric's was 74 or 75, and it was pretty small. It was almost like inboard of the frame rails. So We'll build the can. The can will be out of like 90 thou aluminum, 5052, and then we'll build a return on the top or wherever it makes sense to put the bladder in. It might not be the top. It needs to be the largest opening to put the bladder in. So it might be something where like this back wall is the part that comes off and you don't even see it. So it's just a nice streamlined can. The fill will be on both sides. We'll have dual fills. It'll be something where we can have, you know, maybe it'll be in the window where it can be like notched in so it can still float here if the hard top's off. But we'll have those tie in. I think behind the housing here, we probably won't do like in bladder, like the in tank pumps. We'll have them outside and where they're serviceable. And I think we'll do them in this little void here behind the rear axle and in front of the rear bumper. So we'll be able to have 2 pumps, 2 filters, post and pre, and we'll drop a panel and they'll all be right there in line. So it's like you're not taking anything out to get to that. Eric's with Vivian were a little buried, but these ones, like we have that option now to kind of revise and make these things right in your face. Just get under the truck, drop them, they're right there. So that's stuff to look forward to for next episode. Obviously, shock mounts fully welded up. I'm just gonna go over this one more time. Shock mounts fully welded up, sway bar, arms, and linkage complete. Bump stops complete. I think we're gonna save the cross member if we can. This was a nice piece that came on the truck, and just to stick with design, like this whole thing is back halved. It looks like frame, but it is frame, but it's not stock frame. It's all complete, like custom frame. So I didn't want to just bail on everything, and I think this piece would be a nice cross member saver in the back. So if we can get that, it's a sick tie-in. The bump stops were kind of extruded out of the same stuff, but I don't think we're going to run that. The bump stops will probably live on the outside of this tube junction. And if we're really jamming, then we will be underway with the fuel cell too. So those are all things to expect and set up for. Jason Hurd with JEH Consulting is doing the front end like we talked about, scanning, doing rack steering, all billet. It should be badass. I am not clear on where we're at right now with that. I don't think we started yet. He's kind of taken on a handful of my other stuff, so one thing at a time. I think that's it for this thing. If you guys have stuff, like, let us know about the Bronco. You know, this thing's gonna be, everything we build is always special, but again, this is another special one. And if there's something you like or something you want us to talk about or something we missed or whatever, just let us know and we'll absolutely follow up. So have a good Monday. Like, comment, subscribe. Bye.